to welcome all of you to today's first seminar in the Tocqueville Project's 2013-2014 seminar series in philosophy and political economy. I'm Chris Serpinant, director of the Tocqueville Project here at the University of New Orleans and assistant professor of philosophy in the philosophy department. Before beginning, I'd like to extend a special thanks to both the Institute of Humane Studies, or for Humane Studies at George Mason University, the UNO Student Government Organization, and Media Services here at UNO, which has made this event possible and has allowed us to stream this event online. Joining us today is Dr. Shawn Welnak, Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Long Island University. Professor Welnak received his PhD in philosophy from Tulane University in 2010. His current work focuses on examining the connection between nature and philosophy. Today he'll be talking about a paper he is working on currently, examining the piety of Socrates in Plato's Apology. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shawn Welnak.
Thanks, Chris.
So as I mentioned before, the way this is going to work is Shawn is going to talk for about 10 to 15 minutes, give us an introduction to the paper, and then frame the paper, and then we'll open it up for questions. If you're watching this online, you can submit your questions by email, tocqueville@uno.edu, and I'll get your questions, and we'll do the best we can to get them all in. So Shawn?
Yeah, thanks. So I guess some of you in your comments or questions, I'm just going to try to address some of those things as I give a little bit of an outline, and then those that I miss we can deal with afters. Most of them, I think, which was not unexpected, was my claims about Socrates' seeming atheism, or my bold claims about the connection between atheism and natural science, right? So this is actually why this kind of interests me. I think that the apology of Socrates in some way is an important seminal work at getting at the relationship between nature and philosophy. I'm currently working on another project where I'm trying to distinguish the difference between theology and philosophy on precisely this mark. And I think there are numerous indications in the Apology that it is the concept of nature that is going to separate the theist from, we might say, the philosopher or the natural scientist. So I'm just going to kind of run through some of the things. Now, the first thing I think that one has to kind of notice about the way that I read this is I understand Plato to be performing a sort of rhetorical exercise, right? Some of you point out the fact that that things that I claim seem to be the exact opposite of, in fact, what Socrates himself is claiming. Well, hopefully I can persuade you that there's textual evidence for some of this, but let me say, 15 years when I started my work on Plato, I had the same sort of suspicions. So I just want to touch on maybe two things before launching into the argument per se. First, some of you asked about the title, and I think the title in some way is the key to kind of getting at the underlying impressions that I'm trying to get at, insofar as it can be read two ways, right? First of all, we have to disregard this title, The Apology of Socrates. This isn't a translation, this is a transliteration, right? This is just taking the Greek word and putting it into English, and this causes massive confusion on students' parts when I teach this, because it seems seemingly the most obvious fact about this is that Socrates has no intent to apologize, right? He's entirely opposed to this sort of, I'm going to apologize for what I did. He denies he's guilty in effect. So the other aspect is that I think that the title is sort of playfully ambiguous with what in grammar are referred to as objective and subjective genitives, right? This is highlighted by maybe two instances, right? When we talk about the fear of God, right? This isn't God being afraid of things, right? When we talk about the power of God, this is a power that God possesses, right? But when we talk about the fear of God, it's actually our fear of Him, right? So I think the same ambiguity is sort of purposely put into this by Plato to point us to the two senses in which this is an apology, or a defense speech, as we should say. And the first, of course, is the obvious one, that it's Socrates, a subjective genitive, Socrates defending himself before the Athenians. The other, I think, more interesting aspect is the aspect in which it's Plato's defense of Socrates, right? Socrates being defended by Plato, and maybe when we have our conversations, I'll point to like the one tiny little place where I think Socrates kind of tips his hat towards the fact that Plato is someday going to come to his rescue. All right. So the other thing that some of you maybe were interested in is historical issues. I don't deal with any historical issues in this paper, right? I don't talk about how Socrates was involved with the 30 tyrants maybe through Critias and Charmides. I don't talk about his involvement with the mysteries, with Alcibiades. All of these sort of things, I take it in some way are irrelevant because Plato himself doesn't guide us to them, unless you can point out a place that I've missed maybe where he does, right? But instead, I'm working on the understanding that this is not Plato's attempt to defend, we might say, the actual historical Socrates, but it's meant to defend Socrates as, to kind of refer to the way Socrates himself does through the Oracle, it's to refer to a defense of Socrates as a defense of philosophy. Right? The Oracle is going to apparently claim that there's no one wiser than Socrates, and that what he meant by that was that Socrates is a paradigm. Right? So Plato is using Socrates as a paradigm of philosophy for us too. Right? So I take it that there's a timelessness in Plato's message, not just here's a historical account of what Socrates did and what he said. Right? Maybe Xenophon's account is closer to the historical Socrates. All right, so I want to begin by just reading what to me is the most interesting passage, and it's what I guess almost the whole argument in some way depends on my reading of this passage. So I passed it out, but let me just briefly, for those of you that are online and such, this is on 21 of the actual paper, but we also gave out a little handout, I guess, with it on there for you to follow along. So Socrates says, it's hardest of all to persuade some of you, that is the judges in the audience, about this fact. And now he sets up a sort of dichotomy. He says, in a conditional way, if I say that this is to disobey the God, and that because of this it is impossible to keep quiet, you will not be persuaded by me on the grounds that I'm being ironic. That is, saying one thing and meaning another. And on the other hand, right, so now here's the other option. First, if I tell you I'm on a mission from God, you won't believe me, and it turns out, right, he's dead right about this, because they will think this is irony, the fact that he's talking about being on a mission from God. But now he puts the other side of the conditional. If I say, on the other hand, that this even happens to be a very great good for a human being, to make speeches every day about virtue and the other things about which you hear me conversing and examining both myself and others, and that the unexamined life is not worth living for a human being, you will be persuaded by me still less when I say these things, right? This is what's hard to persuade. So my paper is basically taking it for granted, I guess, or maybe it's arguing towards this, that this is Socrates in his most bold, most outspoken way saying the two options, and that they're identical, right? If I tell you that I'm on a mission from God, you won't be persuaded by me. Far less, is the way I kind of read it, will you be persuaded if I tell you the honest-to-God truth, right? That to give speeches every day about virtue with friends is the highest life. No one's going to buy that. But he thought maybe people would be persuaded, right, if he cloaks it in this sort of metaphor, this allegory of being on a mission from God, which I also kind of, I think, argue that there's just an incredible height of playfulness and almost impiety on the fact, right, that he's being charged for atheism, and the first person he calls to the stand is, in fact, no less than a god himself, right? This had to outrage the Athenians in the audience. All right, so then the paper kind of divides, I guess, into two parts. I deal first with the first accusers, and then, of course, second with the second accusers. And I try to show how this odd claim that the first accusers kind of set the stage and laid the ground for the charges of the latter accusers, and that they're really the same charge, right? And my claim is that the same charge is not believing in the gods, and then the important aspect is that the city believes in, right? That phrase, though Socrates is going to attempt to set it aside when he's arguing with Meletus, he's going to say whether they're novel or ancient, let's just set that aside, right? I believe in gods, according to Meletus's own statement, and he's contradicting himself. To me, this is one of the more interesting aspects because Meletus isn't seemingly able to make sense of his own thoughts on the subject, and Socrates takes advantage of this. I think, how to put this? So Socrates claims that Meletus is both claiming that Socrates does not believe in any gods at all, and at the same time does believe in gods. And then Socrates, as I said, drops the distinction between the novel and the ancient. And Meletus is seemingly fine with this. It doesn't seem to be a contradiction. Well, I claim in here that the reason for that, and this I think is somewhat elusive to us today because of our notions of toleration, right? We're quite happy saying that I'm a believer, I'm a Christian, you're a believer, you're a Muslim. And yet, it seems that what Meletus should respond to this claim is, yeah, when I say you believe in other new divine things, that's equivalent to me saying that you don't believe in the true gods, right? This is captured well in the Muslim Shahada, right? There's no God but God. As a true believer, you should not accept someone else who claims to be a believer who doesn't believe in your God. That seems to me the real essence of Meletus's mentality, right? All right, so I'm going to try to show, how this first accusation that Socrates investigates the things above and below the earth amounts to the claim that he's a natural scientist, how that is in fundamental tension with the belief in gods, right? And ultimately, Meletus is aware of this. How are we doing on time? Good? All right. Okay. All right, so the three kind of interesting aspects of Socrates' response to the second accusers that I'm mentioning here, besides that, the other one is Socrates' seeming lawlessness, as I read it, right? I mean, some of you pointed out or seem to see this tension. The interesting one particularly is in Socrates' claim that if he is corrupting the youth, right, he's doing it involuntarily. And I try to highlight, like, this might sound nice and such, but really it denies the power of the law itself. Because as Socrates points out, the law's job is to punish those who voluntarily break it, right? Who voluntarily corrupt. And yet on Socrates' own grounds, voluntary corruption is a logical impossibility, right? So Socrates has really in some way undercut the power of the law. So I guess, right, I want to talk about in our question and answers, right, the honesty in Socrates' piety, what piety amounts to for Socrates, how much of it is a surface presentation, if he does have a true piety, what sort is it, and what I think will be the most interesting discussion, what is the relationship between philosophy and the study of nature?
Well, thank you. Since I invited you, I want to take the first shot at you.
All right.
It's not really a shot because one of the things that you mentioned at the beginning of the paper was this discussion of Aristophanes and how Socrates is portrayed in the clouds compared to how in philosophy classes you and I usually present Socrates to our students, and the impression that most students come away from reading Apology and the other dialogues with the impression of Socrates. Do you think Aristophanes has it right? Is that really how we should be viewing Socrates and not so much perhaps the traditional account or how we normally view it?
I guess I want to say like two things. One, I think that Aristophanes and Plato aren't that far off. In some way, though, Aristophanes presents the same understanding in a different way, right? He makes it comic, whereas maybe Plato, we could say, makes it more tragic, and so that's part of it. The other thing, honestly, I'm at odds with myself to understand the distinction between poetry and philosophy. Like, I'm just not able to wrap my mind around this. I think about this all the time, but my tentative suggestion, this is highly tentative, is that the difference between Plato and Aristophanes resides in their belief in the possibility of knowledge. I think for the poets, Aristophanes, I think he's very skeptical about the possibilities of knowledge that one can lead one's life on, and therefore believes, really, that the poets have to create livable lives, almost Nietzschean, right? And thus, someone like Aristophanes would be highly opposed to Socrates because he would be destroying the images that are livable, the poetically livable. But I think they're for the most part, I would say Aristophanes and Plato are on the same page, just present the same phenomena in towards different ends. The rhetoric is different.
Well, that's an interesting. Let me think about that for a bit, and let me let you consider some other things. The easiest thing for me to do is to just kind of get an idea of who wants to ask some questions.
As I mentioned with the mic before, we can pass that. Everyone should have an opportunity to get in. So who's... I know all of you have given me questions.
Yeah, I could start on some of those.
Except for you guys. Anyone besides Gaetano? Okay, 1, 2, and then... Okay, so this is the easiest thing to do is I'm going to go and bring you the mic.
Can I start over here and then go?
You said the end of the... Is this on?
It is now. Okay.
You said the end of the poets was that they were going towards the end without the possibility of knowledge. So what would be the end of Plato in the tragic mindset?
Could you say more about what you mean?
It feels like it would be the same thing, because Socrates doesn't really think that he can have any knowledge, and then you just said that the poets don't think that they can have knowledge. So I'm wondering,
I see.
Is it just the utilization of different...
This is interesting, because I guess what I'm claiming, and this has to do with the connection between natural science and philosophy. At base, I think the poets reject nature. All right, this comes out maybe most interesting to use an example. Al-Ghazali, in his kind of attack on philosophy, he points out that some people would say without there being natures in the world, we can't know anything. And he says, if we don't have nature, we won't have the causal relations that we can trace back and thus have knowledge. And maybe, right, when I leave my study and there's a slave boy, I'm not going to know whether when I come back there's going to be a horse pissing on my books, basically, right? So what I'm claiming is that concept of nature is a hypothesis, at least for philosophy, and it's the beginning point, it's a starting point, and that leads to the possibility of knowledge through the causal connections based on an understanding of natural objects. Whereas what I'm claiming is the poets reject the hypothesis of nature. They don't believe there is such a thing as nature, right? Therefore, they have to create a sort of world where it seems like there is, maybe at best, right? Does that make any sense? So Socrates, on the hypothesis, and it's again totally unclear to me whether he ever transforms the hypothesis that there is such a thing as nature into something that's non-hypothetical, whether he's able to get beneath that. But on that, there is possibilities of knowledge, I think, more for so.
Can you say a bit more about the poets not believing in nature?
Yeah, sure. Well, in just trying to get to the ground of what sort of a distinction would there be between poetry and philosophy, right? The first thing many of us do, and this is what I did 10 years ago, is the first thing we say, well, the poets write in meter, or something like this, right? The poets write in meter. The second thing maybe we notice is that poets write in a more rhetorical way with sort of images. But it's my supposition that there's a reason why poets choose, right? That there's a reason why they choose that format, why they use images. And I think part of it is that they don't believe in a sort of objective natural reality. Instead, this is the best way of articulating it, right? Hesiod, when he talks about the creation of the world and stuff, right? It's just chaos came to be. Right? So the world for the poets seems to be just some sort of beginning without explanation, and it also seems to be a void, or it seems to be nothingness or something like that. For Heraclitus, it's a rejection of being in the name of flux. So on this grounds, I would say that Heraclitus is a poet, metaphysically. That entails he's a poet. And the way that he writes, kind of supports that a little bit, right? He writes in a very poetic, metaphorical style. And then also I think that this also kind of ultimately maps on to the difference between philosophy and revealed religion, insofar as the concept of nature, if taken to its extreme, eliminates the possibility for miracles, right, and for God, right? Somebody had an excellent question about what about Catholicism and Aquinas, and I'm not sure what to make exactly of Aquinas at this point, but.
You guys can just stay seated. I'll walk it around. get my exercise for the day.
One aspect of some of you also said, like, this seems like a great leap. I think that's even the word someone used, that I'm reading way too much. One indication of this point about the connection between natural science and philosophy and the disbelief in gods, at least the city's gods, right, which are the important ones, and we can talk more about what I mean by that, is when Meletus claims that Socrates thinks that the sun and moon are not gods but earth, right? In other words, Socrates reduces everything to sort of material elements or a natural account, right? I think that at least betrays that that's what Meletus has in mind. Like, this guy does not believe that the sun and moons are the sorts of gods that Athens thinks they are, right? The sort of omnipotent, whatever we want to say, Homeric gods, but rather they're beings, they're natural beings that are governed by causality. And as I point out, right, Aristophanes hits this dead on when he's talking about how for Socrates all things are compelled and moved by necessity, right? There is no place for gods in this natural science world, I think. Somebody, yeah.
There's all throughout the piece that they talk about how he's questioning the gods and he's going into the affairs of the gods and how that's impious and inappropriate. Mm-hmm. But nowhere do they say specifically that he cannot possibly believe in the gods of the city.
Who's they?
The accusers. They don't specifically
no,
say...
Socrates says, right, he asks, are you claiming I believe in some gods or no gods at all? And Meletus says, that's exactly what I'm claiming, Socrates. You believe in no gods at all. Isn't that the kind of thing you're looking for?
But I'm curious as to how you go from impious and inappropriate to atheistic.
What's the connection between the two?
They're all throughout history, people who believe deeply in whatever religion they believe in, who did things that were inappropriate and impious within their own religion. But they were still heavily religious people.
Mm-hmm. Well, we would have to understand, I guess, what you mean by religious, right? This is a big kind of issue on my mind. I'm trying to figure out, like, what in the world is that thing, right? What, the
Crusades. They were very Christian people. They were very Muslim people. They believed in their faith, but they also believed in fighting for this little piece of land, even though both of their religions say, thou shalt not kill. Mm-hmm. So they're being inappropriate and impious, but they're still religious people.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to get at is I'm trying to radicalize these, right? I'm trying to get to like a radical root. In the sense that I'm using philosopher and, I don't know, let's say theologian, like none of us in this room would qualify for either. We're all sort of mixtures between these with tensions, right? And in Catholicism, St. Thomas is a great example of this. I'm just not sure what to make of him, but he seems to me like some sort of schizophrenic, right? He seems to have a split mind, and I'm not sure if it's rhetorical. I tend to think it's just, but I don't even consider myself like qualified enough to distinguish. Does that?
Wouldn't it be better said that he's agnostic then?
Socrates?
Even in your mode of thinking in the paper, it would be more appropriate to call him agnostic and not atheist.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think again this goes to the. I think in some sense it goes again. Once Socrates takes the assumption that there is such a thing as nature, once he takes that up, I think it just follows as a matter of fact that he's an atheist. At its most radical, at least maybe on Socrates' understanding. And so much of this is coming from my readings of the medieval Islamic tradition and trying to figure that out. But it seems to me that you just don't have any space left for God in a necessitated world where there is just cause and effect, right? Whatever that God that's left, if there is something, and maybe we could say Aristotle's prime mover is an example, right? If he counts, fair enough, right? That's not usually what most of us mean by God, is a thing that's totally impersonal, that moves things by being loved, right? It's kind of weird.
Dr. Welnak?
So I think you make a very sound case for the notion of Socrates being impious and being guilty. But throughout the paper, you equate piety with patriotism, and the notion that
Yeah.
to believe in the gods of the city is to believe in the laws of the city.
Yeah.
So I think it's plausible to call Socrates impious since he is undermining the laws of the city. But my question would go to the very last line of your essay when you ask, can we still hold him in such a positive light? I would wonder why does his lack of patriotism to a state 2,500 years ago, not that the time necessarily matters, why should that lack of patriotism affect our view of his morality or of his goodness?
Yeah, yeah. So this is good because this one of the I think most difficult, most challenging things. I sometimes when I teach the apology, I tell my class that get together a group of atheists, and I don't mean maybe in the way I'm using it in the rigorous sense, but people like the Four Horsemen, right? Hitchens and Dennett and all these guys, right? Put them together on an island, and all of them, they run around and deny God exists. I would claim that they have gods. There's a city, right? There's the city of the Four Horsemen who every chance they get throw rocks at God and denounce God. They have their own gods, right? And this is the best example is what are we not allowed to not believe in, right? So America has its gods, right? We have our kind of sacred things that we don't question. And boy, I mean, as an academic, I kind of came head on into this, finding out, I thought I was going to go to university and I was going to talk about anything and say whatever I wanted and have open-minded people. Not so, right? There are certain issues that you just do not discuss, right? And I usually try to ask my students, well, what are some of these things that are holy in America, right? Our God is equality. That's our God, right? Try talking about that in a really critical way. Try questioning that all people are equal, right? Right? Shit hits the fan. So that's our God, right? So God is being used in a sort of metaphorical way too, right? Does that help? And that what that does is it points to patriotism, right? Every political body has this sort of regime that is the form of it that sets the tone for that regime, and those principles, America, equality, right? Or the other one, what's another great god of ours? The dollar sign, right? I actually had a girl that insisted she had no intrinsic motivation at all. Her whole life was based on making money. And she said this proudly, and I was kind of like, wow, I almost cried, right? But that's, the dollar sign is another one of our gods. So that's what I mean by connecting it with patriotism, right? Those are Meletus's gods. So insofar as you're a good citizen, right? Not maybe a good human being, right? And some of your questions also pointed to this. What's the relationship between the virtue of a citizen and the virtue of a human being, right? In some sense, Socrates or Plato maybe is showing us that the city is both a benefit to the philosopher and also like at odds with, right? They get rid of him.
Hi, Shawn.
Hello, Rana.
I really enjoyed reading the paper. I thought you did a great job in a small space, homing in on the central issues and picking the passages that really are thought-provoking. But
right, I was looking forward to this.
So in particular, I really like the way you emphasized the passage at the end. You would think I'm being ironic if you got that right. I agree with your reading of it. I think you got that reading right too. And also the prior passage about Meletus's confusion, what he's charging Socrates with. Mm-hmm. But if we start with that, I think though that leaves open. You might want to consider that Plato that's really putting Meletus on trial. It's so, annoying and frustrating and depressing that a man who's so confused about what he's charging Socrates with, I think in Plato's eyes, so confused about what the charge is, could have the power to have this man executed. And the way you want to take it, here's, I guess, what my sort of central issue is.
Could I stop for a second?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I think he's that confused, right? That was my point about the
Okay.
Shahada, right? Like, I'm not sure that he's that confused.
Well, let me
to
go,
him, go ahead.
let me go on to where, yeah. So here's what I object to, I think. Well, I mean, I do think he's, confused that he should have stuck with, had he stuck with, no, I'm charging you with not believing in the gods of the city. And
Yeah.
you're absolutely correct that Socrates doesn't even try to defend himself against that. He is guilty of not believing in the gods of the city. I don't think Plato leaves any doubt about that.
Yeah.
So had Meletus been on top of what he was doing, we don't know what Socrates would have done. He would have been at a loss. I think you got that right. And I sort of see where you're going. There's no God but God. But that's where I also think that might be the wrong path to take. It sounds a little too much like revealed religion and monotheism. I think that from the perspective of the Greek polis, there are the gods of the city. I think Plato suggests that even the ordinary citizens somehow sense that there's a difference already between the gods of the city and the gods of the poets and the gods of the philosophers. I mean, certainly, by Augustine, we have that triad that's very useful. Augustine says the Greeks had this triadic thing, the gods of the city, the gods of the poets, and the gods of the philosopher. Whether the Greek polis, whether the ordinary citizens already saw it that way, certainly, certainly the philosophers did. I don't know if the ordinary citizens did. But it strikes me, as soon as you have, the simple way to start this is, as soon as you have polytheism, can you even say, you can say, our God, you have to believe in our gods because you're a citizen of our city. And this is where, you're right, the patriotism and piety go together there. But whether the move you want to make to defend...
I think maybe I would be, maybe I don't mean to take the use of the Shahada that far, right? So in other words, maybe I would be happy with, there are no gods, small g, but gods, capital G. Right, just the idea that in any right, we are not going to take seriously, Nazism or right, some position that essentially denies equality, right? We're not going to claim that's another optional moral view. We're going to just simply say it's not a moral view. It doesn't count as something to be praised, something that's sacred. Does that?
Well, that in a way, I think you have two strands going in your account. One is this more political issue, right? No misdein. You brought that out very nicely, right? It's related to nomos or law. The very charge is you don't know misdein. You don't obey the law. Yeah. So that's the patriotic political gods of the city. That I think that thread of your account is absolutely right. But I'm not sure it's compatible even with this other idea that, take Hesiod already has a crazy array of gods. There's a god night, there's a god strife, there's a god friendship, right? So the question, what is a god, right, is obviously lurking behind the whole thing, both in maybe in the reality of the trial and certainly in Plato's account of it. And
what else, I'm trying to think besides this one line, what else do you see in my paper that points towards this, like going too far, this element that you're trying to key in on?
So because I would want to home in as you do on those two passages I think are crucial, and you've got, I think, a beautiful wedge into the whole picture by the ironic, his labeling it ironic at the end. And by the way, I think I don't know if I ever told you this, but I once had to give commentary on a speaker whom Chris Serpernot invited here, Griswold, gave a paper on irony, and I was supposed to comment on it, and I didn't know where to begin. And so I looked up, because we think Socrates is ironic all the time, that's our image of Socrates. I looked it up, and it turns out it's shocking to me. There are only 5 times in the whole Platonic corpus where Socrates is accused of being ironic, one of them being his own self-accusation here. So that's really interesting. It's a really specific and very precise notion. But I think your use of it is right, that even far less would you believe if I told you what I really think, that the unexamined life is not worth living. Okay, so that's right. And it's connected with the charge of not believing in the gods of the city. But again, I think it seems to me that Plato wants to bring out, first of all, isn't it a terrible charge against these accusers that they don't really know what they're charging Socrates with? Had they known, it would have been powerful. Socrates, you're putting into question the gods of the city and undermining the...
Isn't that going to always be true, though? Right? Isn't that what we're always going to get? Any sort of charge, right?
Yeah. I mean,
isn't going to kind of look just as...
I
It's
think
not these. In other words, it's
yeah.
not these particular fellows, like, that we happen to get bozos. But isn't Plato kind of suggesting, like, any charges of corruption? Take today, somebody charged for, I don't know, not upholding some sort of speech code or something.
Yeah.
Right? Wouldn't Plato say,
it's
like,
usually
look,
very easy to turn the tables and show
Yeah.
that the accuser doesn't. But this is such a profound and specific case of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
What really is Socrates guilty of? And I mean, one way you could push this question, I'm not sure I would want to do it, but one way you could push it is you're jumping pretty fast. He's an atheist, and natural scientists are atheists, right? And you're certainly, I want to come back to nature later, but in any case. But is there any reconstructed meaning of God in Socrates' mind that he certainly tries, right? He does give an argument. He believes
sure.
in divine
it's the other
things
if
and-
I say, right?
Yeah.
It's the giving speeches about virtue with friends is the kind of reconstructed divine thing, right? This is why in the Nicomachean Ethics, piety is related to friendship between him and Plato, right?
And it's got a kind of holiness to it, devotion to the truth and so on.
So isn't that kind of the
I like all that.
reconstruction?
I'm still holding on to a more precise meaning of gods. And it's related, of course. I mean, I think what you're saying in the conversation I hear with other people's questions is right, that the things we're devoted to are sacred and holy and hard to question, and as much in our liberal democratic society maybe as in the Greek polis and so on. But I would still want to have a more specific meaning of gods. And, you've got a couple candidates, right? I mean, he's got this daimonion. What's that all about? He does refer to God in the singular at the end of this dialogue. What is he referring to there? I noticed at the end of the Apology, the Credo, the Apology and the Credo, he refers to God in the singular at the very end in an important way. That's, I think, a good question to ponder. What does he have in mind? It could be it's pure rhetoric.
Yeah,
And
no, I'm
certainly
not committed to that it's pure rhetoric. I'm not committed to that.
Yeah. So then you wonder, right? I think that's not an easy question. What
Yeah.
is he referring to? And what made me think that it might be very important to think about is the Euthyphro, where you'd most expect it, he never refers to God in the singular. That dialogue is more playful, I would say.
Yeah.
It's very playful. So you only get these, you never get one. That's so odd. The dialogue about the holy, not once does it refer to God. But in the Apology and the Credo, he does. And what does he have in mind, right? I mean, you also did a good job, I think, on that line about where he goes, wherever a god's commander stations you, or you station yourself.
Yeah.
Right, there's a lot of ambiguity there. But is there any way in which we have to admit that there's some kind of...
that passage points to the God being inside, right? That passage points to the meaning of God or being an
or at least you
internal
have to interpret
principle.
from your own... You have to interpret anything you would get from a god, right? And also maybe we have to go back. We could also talk more about your interpretation of the Delphic Oracle, what he's doing there. He could have just said, I don't go by any authorities, right, and ignored it. So again, he sort of presents himself as following something, but it has to be interpreted, that's for sure. And you're absolutely right, the way he does it, he comes up with his own, for his own purposes, he interprets it. But why did he have to do it that way? Again, is it just purely rhetorical, or is there something else going on?
Yeah, I guess I take the whole story of the oracle as a metaphor, right? Based on the second, based on this passage that I handed out, right? It's not that passage isn't suggesting, and I mean, one of the things I want to kind of push on this is also our conceptions of lying and our conceptions of truth telling, what it means to tell the truth. And I guess I'm more inclined to say that the distinction is maybe between the truth, well, the whole truth and the truth for you, men of Athens, right? The story of the Delphic Oracle is the whole truth presented for the men of Athens, right? For these particular people. So if that's true, then it's, in some way, it is a metaphor. And I'm granting, it's not just a lie, it's a metaphor, every aspect of which we have to find the underlying meaning. Right? We have to interpret it. We have to do as Socrates does with the poets, is not just look at their words, but try to understand what their words mean. Right? So, yeah. So I'm completely. It's not that there's the lie and there's the truth. There's kind of the truth wearing a sort of garb that the people can see it as meaningful, that they can kind of get it. Whereas if he would have told them, as we would say, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, it would have fallen on deaf ears, but then they would have missed the truth. It's not that he would have been more honest. In some way, he would have been more deceptive by telling the whole truth, right? He would have lied to them by telling them the truth that they understand, right? It's as if, Aristotle and Plato walk up to each other, and Aristotle goes, oh, what's justice, right? And Socrates or Plato, whatever. Plato goes, it's doing your own things. And then Aristotle goes, yeah. That's right. That's exactly right. And that just leaves all of us kind of going like, well, what in the world does that mean, right? We need that fleshed out. So, presumably Plato and Aristotle have the same notion in their head, justice is doing our own things, and thus they can kind of smile at each other. But if either of them told us that that's what justice is, we would learn nothing, right? So the whole truth for the Athenians is actually a truth that is cloaked, or it's wearing a sort of appearance.
But you think Socrates is pious, right? In a certain way, you don't think he's guilty of. Do you think he's guilty of impiety in general, or what is your take on Socrates and piety?
Yeah, he's guilty of impiety as the city understands it, at least. And if we want to understand it in some other way, it's no longer going to be a. Yeah.
He thinks he's guilty of impiety.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He knows he's guilty as charged. Yeah.
In terms of not believing in the gods of the city or not being pious towards anything?
Not believing in the gods of the city.
Okay, well, but then alter that just for a second to get back to what Ronald was talking about.
All right.
Could you be, what would it look like to be pious and not have an idea of particular gods of the city? Is that possible? Could I even be pious to... I don't know. Think of whatever Socrates might be. So if you think that a god could be something like equality in our society, Socrates, and I haven't given this more thought than over the last couple minutes, but what about something like the truth or something like that? Could that be your god? I don't like how that sounds, but could that be your god? And then could you be pious?
Yeah, but the second you tell the city that you are pious and try to persuade them that you're not guilty of impiety, because here's your piety, they would say, like, that's actually why we're condemning you. For what you call piety is why we're putting you to death.
Sure,
right?
But we can still say that Socrates is pious, just not in the same way. That, yes, Socrates doesn't believe in the gods of the city, but if we recognize piety as displaying this particular type of behavior, we could recognize Socrates as being pious because he displays this particular kind of behavior towards this particular thing which he recognizes as his God or the God or whatever you want to, however you want to define it when it comes to the God language.
Yeah, I think my worry is that there is no genus that stands above these two species of piety, and thus we're really just evading the point. Does that make sense? I'm not sure that they're species of the same genus. If we use these two words piety, I'm not sure that there is one thing that makes them both piety. I'm not sure about that. It might be, but I'm not sure. It seems that piety is going to have something to do with taking something for granted, taking something, I don't know, for granted. If you say, I don't know.
Is it on? Does it say mute on the screen?
It has a question mark. I think it's
Yes,
on.
hit the red button at the bottom. And is the question mark gone?
Yeah, it's gone.
There you go.
Okay.
You're on.
Well, couldn't you then say, like, haven't you been saying that nature is their piety?
Yeah, so I think that nature is a hypothesis that is always understood as a hypothesis, right? So if we want to know something, nature is a prerequisite to the possibility of finding out whether we can know something, right? So we assume nature exists. But whereas this, like for instance, most, well, I won't say most of my colleagues in the science department, let's just say scientists, I think they're not any longer, as scientists, working on the idea that nature's a hypothesis. This has been forgotten, for far too long, right? The philosopher is aware of the hypothetical character of nature. So it's not taking something on faith, it's working through a possible world, a possible scenario in which we might be able to come to know something. It might turn out, if we ever complete the investigation, that nature was a faulty hypothesis. But I don't think we'll ever actually complete that. So I don't know that we'll ever find out. We just hold it tentatively and move forward. We need to pass the mic, Kelly. Or Seth. All right.
No, I was just
I just have a quick.
Oh, no, I was just going to hand it to him.
No, it doesn't. Okay, Shawn, again, it's good to see you again. So I have to admit I have not read the paper because I was not aware of your presence until very recently. But I really like the line you're taking right now, and I think all the point you're making about nature being hypothetical is very well taken. But I'm also wondering, sort of along the same lines with Rana, if maybe in some way the situation between Socrates and the Athenians in particular is maybe not as dire as the sense I'm getting you were expressing it as earlier, especially with the Shahada line and things like that. Just because, and this is why it's a one finger, I'm just going to say, the vote was close for the acquittal. He says, I didn't expect it was going to be that close. And that seems to me to mean that the Delphic Oracle, like you were implying, it worked. It worked better definitely than saying, oh, well, I think the unexamined life is not worth living. It worked better than that. But maybe it even worked pretty well, just taken absolutely. And then the sign that maybe it's more like what you're saying, it is somewhat more dire underneath, is that the vote for the death is not close at all. It's a landslide to kill him. But it's not a landslide to vote him guilty. And I'm wondering if you can maybe say something a bit about how you read that sort of disjunction there.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of the people that wrote questions, like quite a few of them were curious about, like, I kind of broke it down. 90% of the questions were like, what are you talking about, scientists or atheists? And then maybe the other rest of them kind of fell under the relationship between ethics and politics. And then the other one was, is Socrates a martyr, right? Has he martyred himself for philosophy? And that is my position, right? And owing to the fact that it was so close, that's why the dinner and the Prytaneum comes up, which Cicero says, like, that was it, right? You know what I mean? So Cicero's like, once he said the Prytaneum, dinner, feed me, right? I need leisure and I need food. It was over for him. So it just seems to me obvious that, he's constantly, it's almost as if some of these people don't even sometimes get his jabs at them. Right? It's almost like he's so artistic that he can jab them without them even knowing it. Though they do get riled up once in a while, right? Every time he says, don't make a disturbance, right? Stop making a disturbance. We can kind of guide that. But your point is, if the tension is so clear, how was that first vote even close? Why didn't everyone just join together?
Little addition.
Hold on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. There you go.
Just that maybe, and this maybe is a little bit closer to what Chris was saying also, that there's some way in which there was, at least in the mind of the Athenian audience, a genus that could hold together Socrates' account of himself and what they think is a right and good kind of way of behaving. Mm-hmm. And I'll think a little bit about, I'm thinking a little bit here about when Socrates says, well, you might say I was stupid for living this kind of life, and now I'm about to be killed, and I should have been preparing, somehow instead of investigating, I should have been getting money and friends so I could save myself, and I didn't. And aren't I ashamed? And he says, no, I'm not, because of Achilles standing his ground and things like that. And I was wondering, that seemed like that kind of worked. I mean, so.
Yeah. I mean, I think we I don't know how to. I mean, Socrates had to look different than everyone else in Athens, right? He just had to look different to everyone, no matter who you were. That creature had to be like interesting or something, right? And even though I think it's Leibowitz's book, he makes this point that seems right to me, is that all the talk about exhorting people to virtue is something of a scam, right? That's not really the main point that because and you'll see this regularly when Socrates talks about examining. Usually it's like examining others, but here and there, every once in a while, the focus becomes examining himself, right? So it seems like there's a lot more of an egoistic drive to find out who he is by asking these other people. But I imagine that not just in the Apology, where he says, I ran around and I exhorted everyone to virtue, but I imagine he presented himself that way in real life sort of as well, or, the character Socrates is, right? I think most people who read it end up thinking, yeah, every single dialogue, let's turn to it, he's always exhorting everyone to virtue. So people had to see that he was concerned with a good life, right? They had to see that, and even if they couldn't understand why he would question certain things, they at least saw that he was trying to lead a good life. I mean, why did he blow it, though? Yeah, why does he blow it? Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is just sort of a kind of a, just take Xenophon's word for it. I don't feel like I could give a theoretical account, but it is somewhat plausible to me to say that Socrates realized that his time, right? I mean, this is right. Websites. The unexamined life is not worth living for human beings. This is actually, we're going to tape record, right? This is just a tape recording of a class I had with Rana. And you point out, like, this is actually a fairly offensive claim, right? We have all these websites that philosophy, our departments, the unexamined life is not worth living. The entailment is that most of our lives, perhaps all of us in this room, our lives aren't worth living. It's extraordinarily elitist, right? I lost my thought. Where was I going with this, Seth?
Maybe you were going to say...
Hold on, Seth. You got to get
I thought,
more than one talking at a time.
I thought maybe you were going to say something along the lines of he detected his faculties.
Yeah. Right.
Like this.
Yeah. Thank you. Right. So right. If the unexamined life is not worth living, it follows as a matter of course that when Socrates realizes that he's not going to be able to examine his life in the highest sense that counts, in the only sense that counts, right? Not in the way maybe that all of us do a little here and there, but in the radical way that Socrates does. At that moment, he had to realize, like, my life is almost not worth living anymore. And thus, it seems that if he can do something nice for Plato and, looking forward to Aristotle and for all of us, the sort of, I struggle with, I do struggle with that account because there's still, Xanthippus says in his last day, like, this is so sad, you're not going to be able to chat with your friends anymore, right? I mean, she seems to really get this guy, but she's right? Xanthippus' right. Why doesn't Socrates do whatever he can to have a few more conversations with friends? On his own logic, on his own reasoning, why end it a moment earlier than your faculties die? It's a sacrifice that doesn't fit egoism. It points to, points to God. It points to something that Socrates holds beyond himself, right? It's not all about him, though it's mostly maybe, but not all. But I'm totally aware of the insufficiency of that account. So this is something I've been talking about since the first day I arrived at Tulane 10 years ago, whatever.
Is it on?
Before I turn, let me just get an idea of who else might want to get in. One,
Behind
two,
you, Chris.
Behind me, 3, 4. Okay.
Oh, go ahead with them. I'll come back to you.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So you had something quick.
Just follow up to your question.
Okay.
So I had to follow up to my teacher's question about. So if we grant that other pieties can exist, something like truth or something like nature or something like the 4 horsemen living on the island and having gods.
Science, right?
Right.
Yeah.
If we can grant that those sort of pieties are plausible, but if we also grant that, as you said, there is no genus above and beyond the 2 pieties, which would give us a standard by which to prefer one to the other, and that's a problem.
Or give them, it would make the using of the 2 terms illegitimate, right? We would be using 2 words that actually don't have any essential connection to each other.
Right. So what I was going to say is if we do grant that those are seemingly pieties, yet we don't have any way to connect them, how is it that we can?
No, but that's right. That's what's at stake. I'm worried about that, right? If you say that they don't have a genus, then we shouldn't be using them. We should discard the one, and then we say, when Aristotle, for instance, talks about piety, he's just using a word that doesn't point to the thing.
So do you see a way to differentiate between the piety of patriotism and Meletus' senses and the piety of something like truth or nature? Is there a way to differentiate between those 2 conceptions of piety?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, just based on the talk about atheism, it seems to me, and I can't, I can't push this to the end, but it seems to me piety is, it has to have some connection to something maybe being too sacred to question. And the only way that you'd be able to find this way of using the both words is if somehow you could say that Socrates' piety is in not questioning the fact that everything must be questioned. But then are we just playing word games? Do we mean anything when we say that? You know what I mean? I'm not sure if that means anything.
How about devotion to something higher than yourself?
Sorry. The question was, how about something
higher than
devoted to something higher than yourself?
I don't know. I guess my worry there is it makes it too broad, but maybe that, it feels like then a lot of things get included. I don't know.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start to my left and then just work around. We'll get everyone, but...
It seems to me that in a couple of places in Socrates' defense, he's arguing to the accusers that if you assume the existence of the gods, if they're there, not necessarily that he's questioning if they're there, but it's that it's his duty, it's how he's made, it's his way of worshiping them, so to speak. That
Socrates.
Socrates. That he can't help but question. That's what he's supposed to be doing. He's supposed to be questioning, and if he weren't questioning, he would be violating what they put him here to do. Mm-hmm. And then he has to share that knowledge, because if he asks questions and then he doesn't share the knowledge, then he's led a wasted life, because if he's not asking questions, he's not doing anything good. And then he's got to share the answers to get other people to ask the questions so that they can do good.
What is to do good? I think it's the activity itself that is the end of the doing good, right? It's the Socratic cross-examination, the Socratic investigation. That's it. That's the end. That's the good, right? It doesn't. We don't gain some knowledge that we then do something with.
Yeah, but except for to get other people to then do that good. To then do the Socratic investigation. Do you think that he's being kind of disingenuous with this argument to them?
I don't know. I worry. I struggle with this personally because, theoretically, I don't understand why Socrates cares about getting others to do this. and yet I love getting others to do this. Right? So like my soul is just one big tension, right? Like I don't understand the theoretical grounds of teaching, and yet like I love it. You know, like I don't know if that helps. If that does that.
Is he being honest, kind of, when he says that this is something that everyone should do? Like, I was in here to do this kind of thing, and it's not necessarily your gods that did it, but if you want to say it's your gods, it's fine. It's your gods that sent me to do this, but this is what I'm here to do. Mm-hmm. And everybody should be here to do it. Is that...
Insofar, if you're asking me, does Socrates think his life is possible for everyone? To me, the answer is no, it's not. It's just not possible for some people. Some people's lives, no matter what they do about it, I don't think they could lead a life that Socrates would think is valuable.
And then does he think that they are worthwhile judging him? Is it...
Oh, no, absolutely not, right? This comes out in the idea of the rulers, right? So many different elements get linked with the Delphic Oracle, but one of the things it allows him to do is explain why, when one's stationed at one's post by one's betters, one has to stay the course. The god is the only thing that could save him from the obvious fact that no matter what the Athenians tell him, he's not going to listen to them. Right? He's just not going to obey them. It follows as a matter of fact that Socrates does not think they're his betters. Otherwise, he would just obey them, and he would either stop, questioning. He would go into exile, but he's not going to.
Another question?
Mm-hmm.
You keep asserting that he's guilty because he doesn't believe in the gods of the city, and that the city doesn't recognize any gods other than the gods of the city. Am I correct in this?
I'm sort of using that as that's tautologically true. I'm not claiming that that's experientially, but it's like a tautology.
Well,
right? Does that make sense
for the
to you?
purpose of the paper, they don't mention anything else, but in Plato's writings, you come across citywide city festivals for other gods from other places. You come across gods being added to the city. Mm-hmm. Parthenon, you come across all kinds of changes within the city gods. Mm-hmm. So
I think those
they do recognize other gods. Why would his not believing in the specific gods of the city make him quote unquote guilty?
Yeah. So I think in some way this is maybe I could articulate it with an example. Maybe we'd have to say, at any given time, we have to consider the gods of the city static. We'll talk that way. But really, it is in flux. And this could be seen, for instance, right, Tulane, cutting edge, experiential learning. We're now in a competition to, see how much time we can spend helping others. What do they call this? Service learning, right? Service learning is one of the up-and-coming gods in our city. Right? Service learning is like the god at Bendis or whatever, right? That's just being introduced, right? And so, and there are people that are bringing in this new god, experiential learning, or what is, this is always my favorite one, engaged learning, right? Right? The new turn towards engaged learning. I want to stick with the old unengaged learning, right? I prefer to keep my students entirely unengaged. Right? So there are going to be changes, right? And there are those up-and-coming new gods, and they will always be in flux. But when they come to the pinnacle, right, when they come to the acme, at that moment, they can't be questioned. Then they become sacred. Right now, you can still criticize experiential learning. You can still criticize service learning, but who knows?
Actually always in flux, who's to say that he's not worshiping a god that has been or will be a god of the city?
Hold on. So the question was, who's to say if the gods are in flux that he's not worshiping something that could be added to the city's group of gods at some point?
Yeah, I mean,
or was in the city's gods at some
maybe
point.
I can use another analogy. This seems to me one of the arguments that's made against the instruction in grammar. Right? The claim is made that because the rules of grammar are in flux, there are no rules of grammar. that's almost the claim that's made. Whereas no one who pushes for grammar, it seems, I shouldn't say no one. The intelligentsia, the first-rate thinkers that talk about pushing grammar, all of them are very aware that we're not speaking the same English as Chaucer, right? The language is changing, but that doesn't show that at any given time there aren't in some way objective grammatical rules. So do you see the analogy? Right? So in some way, yeah, the gods are changing. That doesn't establish that at a certain time in America's history, here are the outliers, and here are the inliers, and the inliers don't question. Otherwise, right, up on the stake with you. Is that persuasive?
She looks unpersuaded.
She does look unpersuaded.
I would keep arguing, but I don't have the mic anymore.
And that's why I've taken the mic. Let me hand it to someone else.
Given that Socrates begins right from the outset to say, I'm going to tell you the whole truth, but you're not going to believe me. And his first witness he calls is Apollo. Mm-hmm. Is it possible that Socrates never had any intention whatsoever of putting on a viable defense here, and he just wanted to use the trial as a grandstand to kind of point out the inconsistencies of the entire system?
No, I don't think I would go that far. There has to be the appearance of innocence. Socrates wants, in some level, he wants the appearance of innocence for a majority of people, right? He wants to be found guilty while also wanting to appear innocent, while also wanting certain people to see that he's guilty, right? He wants all this all has to happen, right? So he wouldn't martyr himself by coming out. This would be totally against Socrates' goal here with the apology, or his defense, right? Because he wouldn't come out and say, hey, I'm guilty as charged, and you know what? To hell with your laws. Look how unjust they are. I can tell you, I can show you, you're killing a great person in me, and he wouldn't do that. Well, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he just, he wants, I think, some people to go away, right? I mean, a few people mentioned the standard interpretation. I mean, the standard interpretation, I think, is that Socrates is pious in the generally accepted sense, right? So he wants that. He wants some people to think he is pious the way the city understands piety.
Sure.
Okay.
No, I'm with you there. And I don't think he started out with no intention of trying to defend himself, but the way he, right off the bat, changes Miletus's charge. Are you saying that I don't believe in any gods? Are you saying I don't believe in your gods? It's as if he just wanted to kind of manipulate the game a little bit along the way to kind of show how inconsistent the charges were.
Yeah. I mean, he is purposely making Meletus look like a fool, right? And this is, I think, Socrates. Maybe I would even say that's more Plato wanting to show that, right? Forever, for posterity, kind of. That's, in some way, it's more important for Plato to show Meletus looking like a fool than it is for Socrates, I think. Does that seem, do you know why? I'm not even sure why I say that. But
no, that would make
sense.
sense.
That seems to be what I...
Yeah, it would make sense for Plato to take that angle, definitely.
Yeah, look at what the city did. Look at these fools, and look what they did to this great man. Hope it, let's all pray that it never happens again.
Sure, but when we get to the end and they're going to levy the judgment on the guy, and
the pray was purposive, by the way. Right?
Sure, and he pitches the idea. Okay, fine, let me have dinner at the Platanium. It seems as if he's just accepted the futility, the entire action at that point.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the interesting thing, there are some scholars that when they discuss that passage, they are so, well, basically they have a certain argument in their head, right? Their argument is all good human beings tell the truth, right? Socrates is a good human being, therefore Socrates tells the truth, right? That leads them into this wonderful acrobatics of showing why Socrates was not being sarcastic or ironic when he said dinner in the Platanium. That was what he needs, and that's what he deserves, and that, you know what I mean? So, and I think that sort of response, I think that was purposive on Plato, or at least Plato's part, if not Socrates, right? look at this man, like he will give up nothing for always his whole concern is to do nothing impious or unjust, right? I don't know.
Another question? Joshua, you want to go first?
No. Yeah, it's fine. Okay, so I wanted to actually ask a question about your account of Socrates talking about the oracle. Like, you go through, and throughout you seem to be claiming that Socrates is aggrandizing himself through the process of interpreting what the oracle has to say. And that seems like I've underlined a few passages
You're not persuaded
about that. But it's confusing that you think, I mean, obviously his particular interpretation that he is the wisest from no one is wiser than aggrandizes himself. But you seem to be implying that interpretation of the oracle is not necessary. And that by trying to interpret what the oracle is saying, that he is doing something impious. That's the claim that you seem to be making, like through pages 7 through 11 here. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't seem consistent with the actual oracle, because the oracle is, the term Delphic means obscure. Like Pyrrhus, the term Pyrrhic victory we get from the oracle telling the general Pyrrhus that a great empire would be destroyed by his attack, and so he attacks thinking that he will win, when in fact the great empire that's going to be destroyed by his attack is his own. Mm-hmm. So it seems like the oracle is designed, at least in the Greeks' mind, to be interpreted. So it doesn't seem like they would consider it impious to interpret what the oracle is saying. And so
No. Okay, yeah. Okay, good. At least this will be a lead-in for us to maybe get on the same page. I am not claiming his act of interpretation has the appearance of impiety or is impious so much, right? Maybe that's let me correct that. I'm not claiming that the act of interpretation will appear impious. I am in some way maybe claiming that the way he does it points to a sort of impiousness. Let me say, I bet you I read this book for 4 years before I realized that this one little "no one's wiser than Socrates," I was just carried along for years reading this book without noticing that from that little tiny claim, suddenly the God has made Socrates a paradigm for human beings, right? All that. When he unpacks this little phrase, and he points to this when he says, "I asked the oracle," right? And I answered on my own behalf and on behalf of the oracle, and right. He points to the fact that he's putting these words. It's ventriloquism. That's what's impious about it. It's more like ventriloquism than an actual act of. He's not a rhapsode. He's not. He shouldn't. In some sense, he doesn't have the skill to do interpretation. He would say that, right? I think. So what I'm suggesting is that, right, he turns a claim, "no one is wiser than Socrates," that could mean nothing more than human beings are all entirely ignorant and their life is not worth living, and best of all is not to have been born, second best to die quickly. That might be the teaching of the oracle. That might be what he's saying, and yet Socrates turns it into the God commanding him to philosophize. You see what I mean? It's outrageous. It's just outrageous, it seems to me, an act of interpretation. But to be fair, I read this for years without noticing the outrageousness of it now. And who knows, maybe in 4 years I'll cease to think it's outrageous.
Just to press you a little further on that account, I mean, do you think that they would necessarily think that that's an outrageous and disingenuous claim? I mean, just the whole history of what Joshua just said, I mean, but there would also be Cyrus defeating Croesus and so forth. I mean, just the whole history of the oracles, sometimes it's really apparent what's going on. And famous people all the time misread the oracle. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem like a given. But you press us to assume it.
I
guess I'm not understanding the question. Could you clarify?
Well, I think you, in some sense, right? You're just saying, I'm not persuaded that the other option, the other alternative, isn't equally legitimate as your alternative. Yeah.
Justified.
Right, equally justified. I guess for that, I would say one has to take it as a part of the whole, right? One has to see how that works into like the whole dramatic account of the Apology, and maybe even some of the other texts that are related to it, in order to maybe get that. Maybe I'm trying to think of some other passages that kind of point me to this. Well, I mean, what does it mean to say, you know, and I answered on behalf of the oracle. I asked, you know, I myself like asked and I answered on behalf of the oracle. I mean, isn't he kind of admitting, like, I'm the one doing the talking and the oracle is my puppet? Kind of.
Historically consistent. I mean, for what we know, we have to do some guesswork. But
Sorry, the question was whether it's historically consistent given what we know.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess I'm inclined to say it would be historically consistent. I can't think of anything that pops out in my mind that, but of course that would be, Socrates would want it to be done in a way that appeared historically consistent. I just think the conclusion is so outrageous that, I don't know. And there's so many indications, right? I don't know. Think about when he talked about what death is. I don't know if I can relate this. If I'll be able to tie this back, but maybe when he's speaking to the people that found him innocent, and he's trying to comfort them, and he says like death is one of two options. And I would have loved to have talked about this stuff too, but I just had to figure out a way to cut it off at 20 or so. One of two options, right? It's either this eternal sleep, and oh, what a blessing that'll be, you know, setting aside the fact that Socrates' goal is to wake everyone up in the city. And then, you know, the second one is that he's going to go down to Hades, you know, he's going to chat with Ajax and Homer, and, you know, it's, you know, and it's always like as is said, you know, if it's as, you know, if it's as the people say, as the masses say, it's, you know, it seems to me there are these kind of subtle cues that Socrates uses to show that he doesn't really believe them. But you could say like, but isn't it historically consistent that people thought that you would go down to Hades and you would chat with these people? And I would say like, yeah, it is historically consistent, but yet I'm utterly persuaded from reading the whole that Socrates does not think one of the options is to go down and chat with these people in Hades. He thinks that's what the masses believe, and he doesn't buy it. It's a, you know, and I guess...
We've got about 10 more minutes, so hopefully we can try to get these last few questions in.
What do you think Socrates is ultimately trying to accomplish with this speech? You talked about that he's using the first argument maybe to make certain people believe in him and others think that he's guilty. Do you think there's an underlying purpose in what he's trying to do?
Yeah. Well, could I answer that substituting in like what Plato is trying to do instead of what Socrates is trying to do?
Yeah, if you could
All right.
both, that would be great.
Yeah. Let me try the Plato one first. I mean, I think that this line about how the oracle is using Socrates as a paradigm, right, for human wisdom, it just points to what Plato's doing, and it points to the ambiguity also in the title, The Defense of Socrates, as being like, there's this one defense that Socrates is giving, and in that, one of the ways he does so is by saying that the oracle has made him a paradigm, and then there's the defense of Socrates by Plato, which Plato puts forward Socrates as a paradigm of human virtue, and insofar as Socrates is a paradigm for human virtue, then it's a defense, you know, we could read maybe, you know, another title for this could be the defense of philosophy. Plato's defense of the philosophical life, right? Before the city. Right? But that's not even quite right, because I want to say that there's a defense of philosophy both for the city, for you, and for the few too. For the philosophers, it's there too.
There's an interesting bit of historical literature too, if you look at what's going on with Socrates and Socrates at that point too, as to what's the next. I've got the microphone. I've got a lapel mic.
He's a first rank guy.
Yeah, I've got two mics on me. But anyway, I mean, that's something else. There's a historical discussion going on there too about what the nature of philosophy is and what counts as philosophy. And I don't know if you were thinking about that as well, but
I haven't spent time on Socrates, so I don't know.
You're missing out.
The only time I've spent on Socrates is the end of the Phaedrus.
I kind of want to revisit something that you said earlier, which had to do with whether or not you said if you put the four horsemen, Dennett and Harris and Dawkins and all those guys on an island, they would have a god. I was wondering whether or not it's appropriate to equate their ideals about science and having evidence for what you believe in with religious notions, and specifically the example that you used was the idea that in America we believe that everyone is equal. That's like a god of ours. However, we
Right.
often fall short of that in a lot of ways. We often fall short of that ideal in a lot of ways, and what I would think as is one of the main characteristics of a god is that it's sort of inalienable and unchallengeable. It's this ironclad power that you can't challenge in any way or bend the rules on it in any sort of way. So I just would like you to comment on whether or not it's appropriate to equate the two, given that that they come from such different places.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I can just give you a sign of their piety. They get angry, right? They're just full of anger sometimes. You know what I mean? Like they don't just kind of have a peaceful discussion, but sometimes they get angry and they say things that are not in a Socratic, right? The Socratic idea that if that knowledge is virtue and ignorance is vice, right? It seems like they really do believe some people are just evil. And that requires them, that leads to the fact that they get angry about people who are religious. And that anger, it seems to me, shows that they have something they are so certain about, that they hold sacred. And those other people, the religious people, they don't see the sacredness of science or, does that
That would
kind of?
Basically suggest the same thing as I said with the equality issue. That would be them falling short of their ideal. That does not necessarily mean that ideal is unchallengeable.
Hold on. So the comment was that it seems like they'd end up falling short of an ideal, not that the ideal was unchallengeable.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's why I use the anger example, because I think it's different from maybe the example of like the Christian who fails to live up to his Christianity. Sure, we all fall short in these things, but you're suggesting the feeling of anger is the falling short. Right? That's your point. That's what makes your point kind of powerful. Is the anger, isn't that just a falling short? I'm inclined to say no. I'm inclined to say that the cause of the anger is a sort of dogmatism that they're entirely unaware of.
But the fact that they're unaware of their dogmatism does not change the fact that at their base, what they're arguing against is dogmatism. So them becoming angry or being,
sure,
if you'll excuse my French, kind of dicks about it sometimes. That doesn't make them.
Yeah.
They're falling short of their own ideal. That does not necessarily mean that their ideal is. That doesn't make it in the same category as religion, I would say. That would, because in religion, if you fall short of the ideal, then you are doing something wrong.
Yeah.
You are doing something wrong as preordained by your God.
Okay, sure. I guess I'll grant this.
Can you just repeat the point, because he didn't have the mic, and so anyone listening, can you just repeat what was said, Shawn?
Well, he's drawing a contrast. Like I suggested that it's entirely fair to refer to some of the beliefs, or at least some, right? That we're going to find some gods among the four horsemen. And you suggested, but people always fall short of their ideals. Isn't their anger, in this case, they themselves falling short of their commitment to reason, right? Yes. Right? And I was suggesting that that's not true because of anger. It's just, and you're suggesting no, that's just one of the ways they fall short. I guess it would depend on what they think the cause of their anger is that would make possible the turning them, right? Like for God, I don't know, a long time, when I found other people's positions angering to me, that's what I turned to. That's what I studied more, right? Things that irritated me, to me that was a sign in me that like I was going wrong in some way, right? I suspect for them, their anger is not a sign that in some way they're going wrong, but is a sign that others are going wrong. If they can make the connection between their anger and their own failing, then yeah, I think then they can make consistent. Then there is that possibility that it is a falling short. I just don't see many people seeing their own anger as an indication of their failing. Does that help?
You're addressing the issue, but what I feel is the issue is that you're saying their anger is a symptom of. I'm saying their anger is a symptom of the problem. It's a symptom of the problem. That doesn't necessarily make. In religion, you're not supposed to be jealous or envious, but if you are jealous or envious, that's simply you falling short of your goal. For them, the goal is to not be dogmatic or not be closed-minded to the point where they don't consider other positions. So if they would get angry at a position, that would be them falling short of the ideal. So you know what? I think I just convinced myself of your position. Because
that's awesome. That makes things so much easier. If we all could do that, I would be pleased.
It's especially awesome because we have to wrap it up too. So to end on some sort of disagreement, please join me in thanking Dr. Welnak for visiting us.
Thanks, guys.
Great. Thank you.